Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where we take you down the rabbit hole into the fantastic world of the strange, the paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen. Come along with me on this week's adventure, and joining us as my incredible co-host this round is the amazing Professor Paranormal himself, Loyd Auerbach. So thank you so much for doing this, Loyd.
I'm very happy to be here, and it's always good to talk to you, Morgan, and looking forward to talking to Craig.
Me too. So just for the audience, if you guys missed the last episode and are wondering, where the heck is Mike? Well, Mike is taking a bit of a leave from the show, and we're going to have a few different co-hosts going forward that are going to be coming in depending on what the subject matter is. And I'm really excited that you could do this. We're talking about the Telepathy Tapes, and specifically an amazing article that was written by a parapsychology journalist and a mutual friend of ours, Craig Weiler, and I'm really excited to get into this. Loyd, talk to us a little bit about what telepathy is, so that the audience has got a bit of an idea as to what that is if they've never heard this before.
Well, I would be surprised if the audience has never heard the term telepathy, since it's all over pop culture and has been. Which is
always what scares me, because it's usually
Yeah. Now, I mean, the original term actually meant feeling at a distance. That's what telepathy means in reality. And it's really just an awareness of the mental state, the emotional state, or even kind of think of top-end information that might be in somebody else's mind. It's coming from human beings as opposed from the environment, which we label in other ways when we talk about ESP in general. It's not mind reading. In fact, back in the 1800s, it was often referred to as thought reading, and my fellow psychic entertainers, because I am one of those too, talked about thought reading. We never use the term mind reading if we can avoid it, because that brings up images from pop culture. It's just not a Vulcan mind meld. Let's put it that way.
Well, damn, I'm a little disappointed, but that's okay.
I have to say that I often start out, because I do perform as a mentalist, I usually tell people, I see people in the audience that are freaking out a little bit. It's like, don't worry about it. I'm not going to go too deep into your mind anyway, because I'll either get too interested or too disgusted. So
makes sense to me. I mean, there's some people out there, some people's children, I'm telling you. But we're taking this, speaking of pop culture, to another level of discussion today, and that is the pop culture phenomenon of the Telepathy Tapes, which exploded online. A podcast done by Dickens about Diane Powell's research and sort of introducing it to the public. So I'm really excited to talk to Craig about this. Let's get this party started. Craig, welcome to the show.
Hi, Morgan. Hi, Loyd. And let me just say, it is great to be here. I'm really enjoying the vibe here. I think we're going to have a great time.
We always have a great time. It's just, that's what I love this show. I love doing this show. I love talking to everybody, because it really does lift my spirits, so to speak, by the end of the hour. And it's yes, the pun was intended. Craig, this is so interesting. Can you give the audience a little bit of background, first of all, about the Telepathy Tapes and the phenomenon that's kind of ensued if nobody's heard about it?
Okay. So first of all, it starts with Diane Powell's research with nonverbal autistic children, although the term non-vocal is also used, because these children understand speech. They can process speech and all that just fine. They just can't speak. And there's a real differential there, because the brain is there in them. All the brain that they need is there, but they have trouble with their bodies, and they have trouble with vocalizing. And so in order to get around that, they use a form of communication known as typing, where, when they're learning, people have to kind of touch them and like help guide the fingers so that they know where their fingers are in space. And then eventually they get used to being able to do this without any assistance. And it's those people that Diane Powell tested for telepathy, because she had heard from parents. By the way, Diane Powell is a psychiatrist who works with nonverbal autistic children, and she was studying savants. So this is how she got into this. Anyway, fascinating story. She started doing experiments on these nonverbal children to test for telepathy. First, making sure that these kids could type without assistance, so that there was no question of whether they were being guided to a position. And they started discovering exactly how much telepathy these kids had, and it was jaw-dropping. So I first saw this research in 2014, and I wrote about it at the time. And it was fairly amazing stuff then, and when Dickens discovered it, it was like she moved off into a whole different realm. I'll get to that in a second. But First of all, the things that they were pulling out of other people's heads were mind-boggling. So normally when you test for telepathy, you don't get a really strong telepathic response. So, for example, when they do the Ganzfeld telepathy experiment, which is a very sophisticated experiment with lots of controls that's done with ordinary people, and where chance is 25%, they will get somewhere in the range of 30%. Right. So it's like they're 5% above chance. Okay, this is normal people doing a telepathy test. These kids could pick a 9-digit number out of somebody's head correctly.
Wow.
Yeah, that's actually kind of unheard of. Yeah. I was going to say in research, because in the Ganzfeld, we're dealing with imagery and describing imagery, and there's a tough judging. When you're dealing with numbers or even words, full words and phrases, spontaneously people have those kinds of experiences, although I don't know about 9-digit numbers, but you don't typically get the kind of specificity with targets that these kids are getting or seem to be getting.
Yeah, and what's amazing to me about that as well is like you were saying, Loyd, the specificity of it. I mean, you either get a number right or you don't. There's really no guessing in terms of, well, it's open to interpretation. No, it's either the number or it's not the number. This is such an interesting topic for me because I'm a bit new to this, so I'm kind of learning as I go. Is within the realm of what you're talking about, Craig. But I do know personally quite a few autistic people who, I mean, are they're brilliant people, and they're various degrees along the spectrum. So this is really, really interesting. What was it that drew you to this in terms of feeling that this was warranting deeper analysis?
Well, I earlier this year I participated in a talk by Diane Powell for the Parapsychological Association. They have these monthly meetings, and she joined in on one of them and shared her experience with the telepathy tapes. And I'm kind of listening along, and the little thing goes off in my head. There's an article here. This is interesting. So I listened to the telepathy tapes, and you go, "Yep, that's her research there." And then what Dickens did with that research is she started looking into the community. And it was an excellent choice on her part, because what she dealt with was the social community of nonverbal autistic children, and discovered that they had their own telepathic chat, which they called the Hill. So they would, when they wanted to go connect with somebody, and remember, they're nonverbal, they're typically very isolated people who have brains. So, it's almost like having locked-in syndrome, where, you have this person with this mind that simply can't express it in any way. So what they would do, all the kids had different approaches, but one of them was for a kid to go in his room, cover his head with pillows, shut out all external stimuli that he possibly could, and then go connect up with other people on what they called the Hill. So
interesting.
Dickens was documenting all this and having everybody talk about, their children and these psychic experiences. And over the course of like 10 episodes, it begins to normalize the idea of having telepathy, because these kids were using so much of it. It was so necessary in their lives in order to have any sort of enrichment. And what they were describing were things like, well, I would go to this place and put on this hat and get all this knowledge from it. And so even though even though they could barely type a few words, they were often quite knowledgeable because they were picking these subjects up out of whatever you want to call it. And all of this was really, really remarkable stuff. And in the middle of it, Kai Dickens got caught up in the middle of something called facilitated communication, which is a huge controversy in the nonverbal world because it got a bad rap, but it's very useful.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that is likely where skeptics' heads are going with this. And we'll get into just how far that's gone in a little bit here. But when people think of this, I think maybe they might be thinking, well, it's a nice thought, but is this wishful thinking that they're getting these messages or numbers, or is this wishful thinking on behalf of parents who wish they could communicate a little better? But I mean, your article and what this is demonstrating is that no, this is way beyond that. And you talk a little bit about a girl, which I assume isn't her real name, but Haley. So if you could talk maybe a little bit about that sort of, I guess, that misjudgment about assisted communication, as well as like what proof do we have that that's not there? Because I mean, Haley, obviously there's some serious numbers going on here.
Yeah. So what happened is that as far as I understand it, and this is just a story I'm relating from another story that was on the internet. But apparently there was some controversy with facilitated communication because it got involved in a child abuse case. And then the question became whether you could accept facilitated communication where somebody's actually helping the kid with their hand to type, whether that would be acceptable in court. And they decided it wasn't. And somehow this turned into, this is a failed communication method. These kids are not typing, that in actuality, their caregivers are doing it all for them. And this became the narrative well before the skeptics ever got involved. It's something within their community. And apparently there's something that's more expensive that, those in charge favor. I don't know the specifics of that, but apparently there's money involved, and that always makes things more difficult. I don't know the details of it. I have not looked into that controversy very far, only that it exists and that the skeptics did use this as a hammer. But when you look online, facilitated communication looks completely discredited, because when you go searching for all the stuff about it, what you find is source after source after source that says this is discredited.
Right.
When I asked Dr. Powell about it, she said, well, there's more gray area here, because I've seen some kids where it definitely was wishful thinking. The parents wanted their kids to be able to communicate and kind of ended up subconsciously faking it for them. And said, but there are other cases where there was somebody in there. And one of the problems with autism is that it's a syndrome, not a disease. And what that means very specifically is that it's a set of symptoms, meaning that calling somebody autistic doesn't address the underlying cause. We don't know the reason, the physical reason that they're doing it, and that they're this way. And because of this, different people might have different underlying causes for their autism, which means that not every system is going to work for every kid.
Right.
Because it's not a cookie cutter sort of situation. Underlying causes could be different. So in some cases, there's somebody in there and you just have to find them. And then in other cases, nobody's home. And, this is a process of discovery. But the problem is that they'll have these kids that can type, right? And they're now doing it with minimal to no assistance. And now they need to go into school and learn with other kids, being able to communicate as typing. And the authorities are saying, no, you can't. No, this is a discredited method. This is all bullshit. And it denies these kids a reasonable education.
I was going to say, Craig, that'd be like denying Stephen Hawking's the ability to communicate by taking away his typing.
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be a lot like that. Um, and apparently, when these kids being telepathic, they could actually contribute a great deal to society. Being telepathic brings along all sorts of other psychic abilities that they could be doing. Uh, like medical diagnosis. Because once you're telepathic, you can do these things. You're seeing stuff that nobody else can really get to, and this could definitely be of service to somebody if they had a disease or a problem. My mother, for example, my wife's godfather is having a terrible time right now because he's bleeding somewhere in his body. They can't find it. They don't know what it is, and it's creating all kinds of health problems, and nobody can fix it. Well, if somebody could just look in there psychically and pinpoint the spot, then they could get to it and fix him. But they considered it all bullshit, so, here we are. People can't be helped. The kids can't find their place in the world, and it's all just because this whole thing about facilitated communication, of which there are a great deal of studies, apparently, according to Dickens. I saw one meta-analysis of them, and apparently it's a reasonable method when done correctly, right? So some of these kids can learn to type, and they can learn to become members of society. It just takes a crap load of training.
Yeah. So during the telepathy tapes, I noticed that they didn't use a lot of, I guess, interpersonal connection too much. I mean, they were very conscious of this. They were very conscious of trying to ensure that these kids were responding out of their own free will, or at least from what I've seen, that's what, or heard that's what they've been doing, trying to eliminate that aspect of skepticism as best as possible, which is a really, really good thing, because I think the more we can lend to this, the better. Where do they think that these kids are getting this connection and information from? Are they? Is it the parents? Is it the people sitting with the experiment? Do they know?
Well, I mean, with telepathy, we know from other experiments that the people closest to you are the ones you're going to be most connected with.
Right.
If you're asking a question of, how is this mechanically in the brain? How is this happening? That's a different story, and there are lots of theories on that. Recent research suggests that it's actually suppression of some parts of the brain that are allowing this part to develop more fully. Basically, it's like if you shut this off, then this other area can light up, and they think something like that is going on.
One of the things that was in your article, Craig, that I really appreciated is you're pointing out how the skeptics simply go after this one set of experiments and the show, and they ignore the fact, as if it's the only evidence for telepathy, as if there isn't 150 years worth of some kind of research in this. And I think that the cherry picking thing is something we see the so-called pseudo skeptics using all the time. Whenever they're trying to talk about it. I mean, that and the fact that they'll just simply take a convenient explanation like facilitated communication or cold reading if it's somebody reading a person without understanding exactly what's actually going on there.
Oh, exactly. That was one of the things that I thought was important for the article, and I actually talked to Dr. Powell about that a little bit. It's like neither she nor Dickens has to prove that telepathy exists. For
Right.
that, we have a crap ton of experimental evidence already in a number of different areas. They do not have to prove that telepathy exists. This is not the bar that they have to achieve. And because they don't have to achieve that bar, because this has already been established that telepathy exists, then the bar for acceptance of what they have discovered lowers.
Right.
It doesn't take as much evidence for them to prove that these kids are exhibiting telepathy, because telepathy has already been proven. So it's a question of, okay, well, we know telepathy is there, and these kids are just, are demonstrating that something that we already know exists. So let's roll with it.
I think you just hit the nail on the head with that, because I wonder how many people sort of delve into this thinking, okay, this is going to be the proof. This is going to be the thing that's going to prove the experiment or whatever. And that's what people don't realize about so much in parapsychology, is the fact that so much evidence, it's there already. It's not something we have to go and dig up again. This is just something to add to the discussion, I think, of the overall whole of the subject matter. I want to bring us back a little bit to Haley, who you talk about in the article, that parents sent Dr. Powell 2 videos of this girl, and I just want to quickly read a little bit of an excerpt of this so that people can understand what's going on with these some of these experiments. Day 1. One of the therapists came back with 100% accuracy on 3 out of 20 image descriptions containing up to 9 letters each, 60 to 100% accuracy on all 3 of the 5-letter nonsense words. Nonsense, I think, is really important here. 100% accuracy on 2 random numbers that were 8 and 9 digits long, as you were saying. And on day 2, 100% accuracy on 6 out of 12 sets of numbers with 15 to 19 digits each, 100% accuracy on 7 out of 20 image descriptions. And I mean, the list goes on. I mean, we're not talking about that small margin. This is really, really massive.
It is, yeah. So what this tells you is that there's something going on. By having such strong telepathy, this is an area where we can start to examine the brain and see what's going on with the brain and what is different about these people where they can have such strong telepathy. This is the real gem here, is learning from these people what actually triggers this kind of telepathy, because it's so strong. The signal is huge. So now we can get more data from it because everything isn't so subtle.
Yeah. Well, it brings to mind a fellow Canadian's research in Ontario, a fellow by the name of Dr. Morris Friedman, who was doing experiments and research on people who had brain damage, Alzheimer's, different types of brain injuries. And I actually mentioned this on a prior show in regards to something else, but I think that it might be relevant here, because what he ended up finding was, and his papers are available online if anybody wants to go and check them out. What he ended up discovering was the fact that the brain almost acts like it's almost like a camera, where it's got all these multitude of filters. And the way he described it was, when some of those filters are removed out of the camera, it opens up the spectrum that people have access to. And I always loved that analogy that he gave. Do you think that might be something that's going on here, Craig?
Oh, God, absolutely. Another area that confirms this is research with the brain and psychedelics. Because, again, you see in psychedelics, they're not activating part of the brain. So psychedelics do not activate the brain for these huge, rich experiences. They shut stuff off. They close off parts of the brain, and then these experiences kick in. It's not a terribly materialistic way to look at it, but if you look at it in terms of the brain filtering, so we've got all this experience that we're getting, and we're filtering it out, and we're getting down to something that we can manage, then these experiences make sense. It's like, okay, so if we have like this massive amount of data that we're getting, and the brain is narrowing it down, then by taking out some of the filters, we get a more rich experience.
Yeah.
And then, you put the filters back in, and then we're back in normal. So normal everyday living isn't about we're experiencing all there is. It's about we've filtered everything down to something that's manageable.
Yeah, and that's very clear with perception in general. I think we all filter out background noise when we can, and we filter out certain smells after a certain time that are bothering us. Our perceptual processes are different than our senses, which is why ESP is extrasensory. It's not a sense. It's actually part of the process that we're picking up.
Yeah, and one of the things that fascinated me when I was looking into psychic ability was that it does function like one of our perceptions, and that is that we notice changes. Because in all of our perception, we notice differences. For example, I'm in construction, and sometimes I deal with paint. Now, if you look at a wall of paint and you see a color there, you can't match it to anything close unless you have this paint right in front of you and you put them together.
Right.
You can't match them without putting the two together. It is impossible. Particularly like when you're dealing with, the 500,000 different shades of white there are out there.
Yeah.
So, this is about change. This is about differences. We can notice differences in changes in levels of light. We can notice changes in color. We can notice changes in, of how, I think you can see this just absolutely infinitesimal speck of black on white. As long as there's a difference between the two, you can notice, and the same works with movement. And psychic ability works the same way. You're looking for changes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a great analogy, by the way, to get people to understand what the difference is there. And I think with perception, I think people get really, really wrapped up in their own perception. Like if they're not perceiving it, then how could anything else be going on around them, right? And one of the examples that I always like to use is, everybody on the show knows my little snake Galen, but I bring him up a lot, and I bring him up a lot for a specific reason, and that is his view of the world is so unique because he experiences it within different senses. He can see heat because he's got different mechanisms to see heat. He can smell which direction a smell is. He can, his whole system works differently. Like if you put blindfolds over his eyes, he can still receive visual information through the sensory pits on his upper lip. So you could blindfold him and have him do a task and he can still do it because he's still getting infrared vision and in sensory input. So, and people think, well, how can this person be experiencing this when, that doesn't make sense. The brain doesn't do that. Well, hold on a minute. Like there are plenty of examples out there of different beings, including people, that are experiencing the world in a very, very different way. And I think once we can get our heads around that and then understand that, our consciousness is not locked up in our noggin, that I think it begins to open up a lot of doors. But I think, Craig, what you're saying as well is not only about perception, and correct me if I'm wrong, but also that we have to stop thinking about the brain as the sole source of the consciousness in our head.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's that model doesn't make any sense in context to the evidence that we're seeing in different areas. That this whole thing of the mind existing in the brain doesn't match evidence. For example, of it's like, where's memory? Nobody knows. Can't find memory.
Right. I was going to say the brain provides us with filters. It doesn't produce the phenomena that we're dealing with. It filters out what our senses pick up. But we've seen so much evidence now coming because of consciousness studies from all sorts of fields, and parapsychology has been looking at this for over 100 years. So it has made changes, and I think that's an important lesson. I think from this particular set of podcasts, the Telepathy Tapes, that there's much more to it than we're thinking of.
Just to confirm that, I want to draw on a different research. I think it was by Mark Whitman. That so the research he was doing was on sensory deprivation, and so sensory deprivation can also help elicit these rich experiences. And one of the things that showed up in the podcast was that these kids did not feel connected to their bodies. They felt disconnected from them. They didn't feel like they were completely in them, and that they were having trouble making their bodies do what they wanted them to. And so that may be part of the secret sauce for the telepathy, is the fact that they're not completely connected into their bodies. because
Interesting.
I get the feeling from seeing this research that the body is part of how we stay within physical reality. That this constant input from our bodies, from all these senses that we use constantly, is helping us stay in physical reality. And that when we don't get any input from those senses, the mind starts reverting to a timeless, spaceless routine that it's familiar with. Which
That's
is to say,
really,
these
really
rich,
interesting.
wild experiences.
That's so interesting because it brings me back to places like the Monroe Institute and Robert Monroe's work, and just having, how he really focused on, well, I mean, of course he was using sound and hemisync and things like that, but to get to that feeling that that you're saying these kids are describing, which is almost like this sort of disconnected, not quite attached to your body. And then you start having these interesting experiences. Like there's this aspect of letting go that is just this recurrent theme through so much of parapsychology in general, but definitely in this. Do you think maybe because these kids often are more present in the moment? Because I know that's one thing. My friend of mine, he's got 2 autistic kids, different points on the spectrum, I would say. But his youngest specifically is very much in the moment. Like he's a very joyful kid. He's great to be around, and he shucks things off very quickly. If something happens, he has a big reaction, but then when it's over, it's over. Which, I mean, most people that don't have autism can't do that. We're dragging around baggage from 5 years ago. But these kids tend to be, at least from my experience, a little bit more in the moment and are able to let go a little bit easier. Is that might be something that's playing a role here?
That would be on track with what I understand of autism. That if you're if the part of your brain that is handling the ability to speak and all of these logical ordinary things, if that part is having trouble, then yes, you're being more dependent on your right brain, which is going to be more in the moment. It may be that I don't know. They don't have a specific part of the brain that keeps track of time that I know of, but if they did, it would probably be somewhere in the left hemisphere that's keeping track of time and keeping you in that space. And if they're not solidly in there, then they don't hold on to things as much. Yeah. It makes sense to me because it's like these autistic kids are right in line with everything else that's being discovered in terms of this. It's just that they're adding to it.
Yeah, and that's what's really exciting about this. And I think this is what people really need to open up to when whether they're dealing with somebody that maybe has autism or trying to understand this, because I think what you're saying is really important, even just beyond the parapsychology side. I think this is a really important discussion to be having. Let's talk about the nature of the Telepathy Tapes show. I know it's been criticized in the media for being too much like a show, or it's not scientific enough and whatnot. But you bring up a really, really good point in your article about why it's important that this was presented the way it was and the accessibility it gave to people that were learning and watching and just that were new to this.
Yeah, when I was listening to the show, the part of me that judges people kicked in, and there's, you can't always tell when people are, kind of dishonest or shady, but if they're really above board, like totally upstanding people, you can kind of get that immediately about them. That tends to come out. And that was something that was coming out about Kai Dickens, is that part of her shone through, that there was a lot of sincerity and honesty and a willingness to explore things that were more difficult and controversial, and to allow these things to be controversial. In other words, she wasn't presenting them in a skewed light. She wasn't biasing everything. She's just telling the story. And you could tell that it was very important to her to do that, is just to tell the story, such as it was. So I felt that her credibility was really high. And when I started looking into the skepticism, it was like, oh, these guys again. Oh, God, look at them go. Yep, this is the Center for Inquiry, and here they are. They've mounted their horses, and they're going after people, stabbing everything they can find. They are verbally very stabby.
That is possibly the best way of describing it that I've ever heard on a number of fronts. Stabby is the technical and clinical definition of it, people, by the way. Yes. And never have I heard it put better. But it's so true. Like the amount of I get bravery, really, of putting this forward on such a public setting, and then having it explode the way it did. I mean, Loyd, you and I have both been in the media for a really long time, and I mean, it's a hornet's nest. It's a hornet's nest out there.
Yeah. I mean, the issue is you got to tell a good story if you're trying to keep the audience's attention, right?
Yeah.
And in this particular case, you can have very credible people who tell a really, factual story. And frankly, as Craig knows, it wouldn't matter if it was like exactly right, because they would still be stabby. Thank you for the term. There are people, and again, I referred to them earlier as pseudo-skeptics. I know that's a term that Marcello Trucci came up with years ago, because they're not really skeptics. And I've talked to a couple of the people who have been attached to the Center for Inquiry who are more skeptic than, they're still a little bit on the other side, but they're more skeptic than they are pseudo-skeptic. And it just boils down to any time that there's something in popular culture that is capturing a lot of attention, that's low-hanging fruit for them.
Yeah.
And they're not willing typically to have, first of all, they don't have the curiosity to see what's really going on. Wouldn't you say that's true, Craig?
Oh, completely incurious is one of the defining traits of these people.
Yeah.
They really, it's just, I could tell when I was listening to Telepathy Tapes going, yeah, their brains are exploding. This is really too much for them.
Yeah.
Because this show is normalizing telepathy. They can't handle the truth. They can't handle the truth.
And I'm sorry to say that there are people on the other side, the true believers, who also feel the same way. Because when you normalize the paranormal, it kind of takes something away from people who are trying to make themselves special by looking into it as well.
I was in the New Age movement for a long time, and that trait annoyed the ever-loving crap out of me.
Yeah.
People who are... I was teaching a class in just like this really super basic psychic development with another guy a few years ago, and like he was supposedly this super spiritual master, and I could tell right away that first of all it was all about him. Everything he did was super special and amazing, and the other part is that all these things which basically get normalized, like let's say remote viewing. He's like, oh, this is a super special, dangerous thing that needs all this training. No, it's not. Anybody could do it. It's pretty normal. And, he couldn't handle that idea that, that something that he treasured so much was actually just a fairly pedestrian psychic ability. So, on the true believer side, I've seen that. I'm not impressed.
Yeah. I kind of run into both quite a bit. And it's always funny. Joe McMoneagle, #1 viewer for the Stargate program, did a lecture recently for the Rhine Center talking about basically that remote viewing, for example, boils down to getting out of your own way and unlearning stuff and how we interpret things, not the $3,000 to $5,000 coordinate remote or control remote viewing studies or courses that I know really frustrate him and frustrate Ed May, who ran that program for a long time.
Right.
Maybe it's because they're not making the money themselves because they don't feel ethically they can do that when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I think there's this element to it. to that side of the true believer's argument that's so narcissistic, and this idea that, okay, it's almost like a grandiose narcissism where I'm special, I'm magic, you have to pay attention to me. And it's really the complete opposite of what we're talking about, because I think with the not only things like telepathy, but different psi experiences, even people that have experienced apparitions and stuff like that, like all sorts of across the board, is that there's, again, it lends to this sense of, okay, letting go, having a bit of a belief that often sort of helps have these experiences, people that are a little more open-minded, and whatnot. And so when you get somebody who is just so hard-headed when it comes to either skepticism or, okay, everything is paranormal or psi or whatever, then, I mean, to me, it's just the complete opposite of everything we're talking about. This has nothing to do with somebody being super, super unique. It's just a matter of how well can you, I think, number one, self-analyze, and number two, how well can you just, let go and humble yourself to the process of what creates these experiences. Because for me, I know it's a humbling one. You have to challenge yourself.
Oh, absolutely. You learn very early on that if you're going to make a big deal about it, you're creating noise that will prevent you from doing a better job.
Yeah.
And of course, there's always the other side of it, which is these frickin' true believer skeptic types. The telepathy tapes was like such a classic case of character assassination by the Center for Inquiry. I mean, it started with this guy, Jerry, Jarry, and he did this. They always start with somebody that I've seen, if they, for credibility's sake, they'll get somebody with a position in a university and have them published through a university thing. And then the Wikipedia people get to work. And they completely, but by like constantly referencing that article in Wikipedia and tying it to the telepathy tapes, when you type this up in Google, that super negative, horrible, vicious article comes to the top. Yeah. So that criticism shows up with everything else. And that gives, a couple of things. First of all, it intimidates anybody who might be, interested in the telepathy tapes and felt that they had a thing. And now they see this super attacking thing from a professor on a university site. And, then that'll give them pause. That's exactly what these people want.
Yeah.
And then they have an article from the Skeptical Inquirer where they're preaching to the converted. This whole thing kind of snowballs into the skeptical world where all these these wannabe skeptics then all send this crap out through their podcasts and Reddit threads and all that kind of thing. It's kind of a pain to watch.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to clarify for people too is that, we all have to be skeptical to some degree. I mean, there's a healthy level of skepticism that's really, really important in this field. And I think, Craig, just to sort of define it, and I mean, we've had you on the show before to talk specifically about what they call guerrilla skepticism. But we're not talking about just, looking at something and being critically thoughtful about it. We're talking about an actual attack, and the want to bend the media with an agenda is. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit so that people understand the difference?
Yeah. So if you want to know what a real skeptic looks like, that person will look at the original evidence, the argument, and very importantly, the rebuttal to the argument. And if you don't get all the way to the rebuttal, congratulations, you're not a skeptic. You're a true believer. Right. Because what you did was you stopped at the most negative thing and you said, well, I'm done. I have enough. It's obviously all crap because this person said so. And that's a biased position. You have to go beyond it if you're a real skeptic. So if you ever want to find out if somebody's a real skeptic and they're busy ranting about something, say, well, what would the other point of view be? What was their position? What did they say? They won't know. unless they're a real skeptic, they won't know because they've never done anything beyond trying to confirm their own biases.
Yeah, and I think it's that, if you apply critical thinking, you look at both sides typically when you're doing that. And as some folks have put it, skepticism is doubt, it's not disbelief, and it's not bias. And perhaps you're a skeptic because you've never made up your mind also, which makes you more of an agnostic than anything else. But I would much rather talk to somebody who will admit that they have not looked at the evidence or looked at the counter evidence or anything else, rather than just simply dismissing it out of turn or saying, well, that's wrong. It's got to be a demon coming in and doing this kind of thing, which is
the famous D word.
From the other side.
Oh, yeah. Nails on the chalkboard.
Yeah.
One of the things that happened for me after I had started engaging the skeptics on a regular basis was that literally changed how I dealt with some stuff. And suddenly the words, I haven't studied that, I don't know, became a much larger part of my vocabulary.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the problem. Well, let's face it, that's a problem with people in general. People mostly don't want to admit that they don't know something. I've taught public speaking for many years, and in a Q&A situation, those are the three most important words you can come up with if somebody asks a question where you really don't know the answer, followed by, I'll try to find out for you. That's really it.
Yeah, it's so important.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, without that, I think that's when you start to run into trouble with word salad, and you end up losing credibility at that point. And just being humble enough, and sort of going back to what we were talking about earlier, is that there's a humbleness about studying this subject matter, whether it be whatever field you're in. You quickly learn, if you're doing it correctly, that you know nothing. Like, I am proud to say that I know next to nothing about and every time I think I know something, I realize I probably don't. There's something new that opens up, and I'm like, okay, I've got 1,000 more questions than I did when I started. But I think that's part of the journey of this, is just to be humble enough to say, look, I don't know, I want to know more, and go into it with that open-minded attitude. And then stuff I've found, just sort of go down the metaphysical rabbit hole a little bit. That's when I find stuff really starts to happen, is that these experiences begin to present themselves to me in a way that I'm like, okay, like, I don't know if I would have had this experience if I was completely grounded in my thinking. And that's what I kind of love about the telepathy tapes as well, is that it's a bunch of people that really were willing to go there with a really open mind and see what happens. And and look at what has come from it. I mean, it's so big and it's so important. Craig, what do you think is next for this? Like, I know they've been talking about a documentary and whatnot, but scientifically, where is this going to go?
That's an interesting question. So first I think that, if we're talking about this nonverbal community, is they need to be recognized for who they are, and their gifts need to be taken seriously.
100%. And
that until you establish that groundwork, they're really not going to get anywhere. If they don't get taken seriously, then, or if they're perceived as just being puppets of their caregivers, then nothing's going to happen for them. And we don't benefit from the things that they can do, and we don't take any lessons from them, because at that point we don't respect them. It's like in the last 2 episodes when they were sharing what they were, how they felt about things, it was interesting because when these kids who are massively telepathic get together, they find love and light. And they see the world in terms of love and light. And if you want to get a skeptic's brain to explode, that's how you do it. Start talking about love and light. Obviously in this place, it's a very, very good place, and that, you're dealing with the fundamental goodness of humanity in there. And now they can't share it with anybody, because nobody believes them, because they think they're all puppets of their caregivers. This is, I think, the real damage of this sort of knee-jerk skepticism, is that it just makes everything harder and creates more of an uphill battle. So I'm really happy that Dickens has, brought this up, and push this agenda forward. And hopefully this can get farther. I do know on the 16th she was filming at Ions.
Yeah.
So she's making some progress. Ions Institute of Noetic Sciences, for those who don't know. So that means she's talking to probably Dean Radin or some other people over there.
Yeah, and he's fantastic. He's for everybody listening. He's been on the show as well before, talking about some of this stuff in regards to the magic in the world. He came on. We were talking about different experiences and creating our reality. And here, this is such a perfect discussion to talk about that. The more that this is coming out, the more that this is, I think, being accepted. What a gift they are giving to kids that might be written off otherwise. And I think that could be probably the biggest takeaway from the telepathy tapes, is the fact that, people that might dismiss kids that are autistic or nonverbal as, not knowing anything or any, like, hold on, this is really recentering people's idea and maybe opinion about what these kids are capable of and what they are offering to the world, because it's huge. It's huge.
Craig, what would you say? I mean, would you say that the telepathy tapes and the whole show and the experiment, part of the reason that the skeptics or the pseudo-skeptics are responding this way is because it adds to, not only just with telepathy, but just generally with these kids, adds to the non-materialist potential nature of consciousness, which threatens their worldview, their paradigm directly. Would you say that that's a big, part of the emotional reaction to that?
Well, yeah, the whole skeptic case is built upon a house of cards of this strong belief in a materialist type reality. And with the telepathy tapes, where you're dealing with such strong, unavoidable, obvious telepathy, and this is going to come out in a paper at some point, and it's going to further it. This drives a nail in that they can't get out.
Yeah.
That because as this gets more established, it gets, so basically think of it as this is now a seedling that's gotten its roots into the ground, right? The telepathy tapes. And as this thing grows, the roots go farther, and it gets harder and harder to pull it up until it becomes completely impossible. And this is kind of the situation they face. It's fairly existential. And once telepathy gets over that edge, all the other psychic areas do too. Everything starts to come with it. Right. So this, in some of their areas of great hate, chiropractors. I do not know why they hate chiropractors, but oh my God, chiropractors in Santa Claus are on their hit list.
It's because they're not real doctors, I think.
Right. It's like any sort of complementary medicine, acupuncture, Reiki, and all that stuff. Doesn't matter how many studies you have showing it's real. They think it's fake. All complementary medicine just down the road. So all of those things now come back into play if telepathy is real. I don't know about Santa Claus. Yeah. Probably going to have to wait, but...
well, unless Santa Claus is a thought form we've created ourselves with our belief.
Now there's an episode.
Santa Claus the Tulpa.
The Tulpa, yeah. That's right.
Oh my God. Well, this conversation has been absolutely amazing. I think it just opens the door to a whole new level of thought with this. Craig, your paper is absolutely fantastic that you've put out about this. It's called, for everybody out there, The Telepathy Tapes, When Research Gets Both Sensationalized and Attacked. It's really, really good. Hopefully it should be out now for people listening, because it now will be the end of June, and we recorded this earlier. So it should be out soon. Craig, where can they find it and you and your incredible books?
So I have a book that deals with skepticism and a controversy that happened in 2013 at TED Talks. And the book is called Psy Wars, TED, Wikipedia, and the Battle for the Internet. And we do talk about I do talk about the problem with Wikipedia on that too. So the article that I'm publishing is with Paranormal Daily News. It's an online magazine, and it deals with paranormal topics and science of the science of the paranormal. I'm actually the science editor there. So we do have some science articles related to the paranormal there. And we've also recently, for example, had a person who is a historian of the Scottish witch trials published an article, and that was really cool. So it's a very high quality magazine, and the articles are well worth reading. And I'm very happy to be part of it. And it's Paranormal Daily News.
Oh, that's fantastic. This has been so interesting. I have learned a ton. And it's just been great. So Craig, we're going to drag you back at some point. And because we always do. And it's always just such a pleasure to talk to you. So
thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
That was a really great discussion. I mean, Craig does know what he's doing. He's a really good journalist. I highly recommend paranormaldailynews.com for his articles and other material that happens to be there. The thing about all of this is that it's important to look at, from the outside, to look at what's actually gone on. And Craig has looked at it from the telepathy tapes, from both what was really going on in the research and what was presented in a popular culture podcast. There's, I won't say dumbing down, but you have to sell a story and get people interested. And that absolutely Kai Dickens has done in the telepathy tapes. But I love kind of our discussion about the skeptics, because that's something I've run into all along. And it's just amazing to me sometimes. When you ask the right question, they either retreat right away or they kind of look at you like you're crazy. And I don't care about either one. So personally.
No, I can't blame you. And I think you're dead on. Like it's such a interesting topic, because you've got so many points of view that are coming at this. And what I love about this, the research, and if people actually dig into, like you were saying, the 100 years of research prior to this, there's so much that's there. And I would definitely encourage anybody that's listening to this to not stop at the Telepathy Tapes podcast. You can go further than that. There's plenty of resources out there. One of my favorites is the Science Encyclopedia. That's online. It's free. You can go to their website. And I think there's so much there. This is just such a beautiful way of opening up a relatable discussion for people, that they can wrap their heads around this. It's been great.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that my website, LoydAuerbach.com, has a resources page, and I've listed, and with descriptions, all the credible organizations, but some other resources on YouTube and places like that, people to pay attention to, researchers who have been putting their work out there. So it's a good starting point for folks. I mean, there are great organizations. Craig mentioned the Institute of Noetic Sciences. There is also, of course, the Monroe Institute. I represent the Ryan Research Center, which is hitting its 90th anniversary year from the founding of the Duke Parapsychology Lab.
Which is incredible.
Yeah, that in itself is incredible. And, there are places that people can learn. We offer courses through the Ryan that are not just academic. They're kind of for the general public, too. So if people are really interested in seeing what the evidence is, it's not hard to find. I mean, that's the thing that bugs me the most about the skeptics. And it is, they don't want to look. Why would they look if they don't believe it's possible? That's their attitude. But there's so much. I mean, it's so rich. Last year or 2 years ago, the 50th anniversary edition of Dream Telepathy by Stanley Krippner and Montague Ullman was published. And that was research on dream telepathy at a major medical center sleep lab in the New York area back in the 1970s. I mean, how do you say that there's no evidence when there's good scientific evidence that's out there? Even some of the skeptics have agreed there's good scientific evidence.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing here, is that that people can't look at just one thing and then just rule something out. They can't just make a decision based on something that they've seen. And I mean, I think people being critical when they see something paranormal come out in the media, I think is wise.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we know how many credible shows there are out there. But I think that's really important, and I think it's important that people go into anything that they see on television, or on YouTube or anything like that with critical mind. But like we were saying, go further, and especially with subjects like this, because what you see is not what you get. And I think having the awareness of the fact that there are groups out there that are deliberately trying to knock this down, not disprove, but knock this down, is something that people need to just keep in the back of your mind as you're going down this road.
Yeah, and it's always interesting because they say that they're doing it to protect the public. And I'm trying to figure out, I've asked some of them that I've run into, protect them from what? I mean,
yeah,
it seems that many of them believe that belief in the paranormal or any sort of psychic phenomena is some sort of mental disorder.
Yeah.
And
yeah, which is crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah, that in itself is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to give a diagnosis to it, but yeah.
Not the official diagnosis, but,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
But it is. It's there is something about that there where I think where people are. I guess that's been around for a really long time. This idea that, if you're seeing things, or you're so-called hearing voices or anything, well, then therefore it's got to be this one thing. And again, it's another area where if people would delve into it, they'll realize that there's this massive gray area, and we know just very, very, very little. As I was saying before on the show, I always feel like just when I think I know something, I realize I don't know, and it's just a humbling experience when you realize this universe is still full of a lot of magic, and we're just on the cusp of figuring it out.
That's right. That's absolutely right. The idea of a paradigm shift, a shift in the worldview, I can't remember who said it, but it was said that only happens after all the old guard dies off.
Absolutely. Oh gosh, that's so true. So Loyd, where can people find you? Because they're going to want all those resources that you just mentioned.
Yeah. So just go to LoydAuerbach.com. I think you can see my name right on the screen there. Or in the
you'll be in the show notes.
It'll be in the show notes. It's just LoydAuerbach.com. Go to the resources page. All of my books are listed there too with links. A couple of them are now audiobooks as well. Although I will admittedly say that I used AI to do that part of it. And they can also contact the Rhine Research Center, rhine.org. That's RHINE.org. And the other organization I'm connected to is the Forever Family Foundation, which certifies evidential mediums and supports their work in research as well as in the family grieving process. And that's just foreverfamilyfoundation.org.
Yeah, and that's such important work, because I also often get messages of people saying, well, do you know somebody that can help me? Forever Family Foundation, hands down, is one of the best places that you can go, if not the best.
Yeah, we have our list of certified mediums. And let me point out that communication between a medium and a spirit is telepathy.
Yes, exactly. No kidding. Well, guys, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you for joining us on this eerie and fascinating expedition, my dear listeners. And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends.
Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker, Paranormal Research and Teachings, and the 20th Plane. This podcast is a part of the Curious Cast podcast network. You can find out more about me, Morgan Knudsen, and book me for live appearances at entityseeker.ca. You can also email the show at supernaturalcircumstances.com.